Hello everyone, thanks so much for coming. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the room. This is my first time seeing a lot of you since the new academic year started, so welcome back. I'm very happy to have such a vibrant audience here today for this panel on contemporary challenges in the campaign to end violence against women and girls, with a specific focus on preventing online attacks. I'm going to quickly introduce my colleague Scott Campbell from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the UN. He's a senior human rights officer there and is stationed here with us in Silicon Valley for a little while. So I'm going to let him give a quick introduction of his work, and then I'm going to go ahead and introduce our distinguished panelists. Thanks, Scott.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Jessie, and thanks very much to the Honda Center for co-organizing this event with us. It's really a pleasure, and the partnership with Stanford and with the Honda Center is highly valued. So thanks for that. As Jessie mentioned, so my name is Scott Campbell. I represent the UN Human Rights Office in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley area, as we seek to establish a regular presence in the area to engage with the technology community on human rights issues, writ broad. One of our main goals is to introduce a human rights-based approach to the design and development of new technologies with the overall objective of seeing that new technologies serve as a positive force to promote and protect human rights rather than as a weapon to infringe upon them. I will be very brief, but I did want to note just that our High Commissioner, one of the things we're trying to do as the UN Human Rights Office out here is to serve as a link and a bridge builder between UN human rights experts, such as the Special Rapporteur who's with us today, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, who came out in June and spoke not very far from here, to bring in other parts of the UN human rights system as tools, as allies, as part of a broader network to promote and protect human rights through engaging with the technology community and tech companies specifically. One of the points that our High Commissioner raised when he was out here in June was the importance of working in partnerships and working within broader communities that share this overall objective of seeing technologies used as a positive force in terms of impact on human rights. And that just brings me back to the importance of this partnership with the Honda Center. And again, just wanted to thank you. We think there's a lot of potential support that the UN Human Rights Office can bring to Stanford, to universities, to really a diverse set of actors. We'll hear from two very important speakers today, and I think there's. I've been struck recently by the potential, looking at the UN fact-finding mission report on Myanmar, looking at other UN reports on content, online content moderation, of the potential that I think we can add to ongoing efforts and hopefully be a good ally to all of you in a common effort. So I'll leave it at that. I hope to see you all again in the coming months as we set up our presence.
I'm sure you will, because we've had the last two High Commissioners here, so we'll be eager to welcome Michelle Bachelet to campus. Navi Pillay happens to be here in residence right now. We're hosting her for a few weeks, and we'll be doing some events with her, the former High Commissioner. She just happened to be in Geneva today, otherwise she was going to participate with us on this panel. So more to come from her. But it is my distinct pleasure, like I said, to introduce our two speakers. We're going to start by hearing from the UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women, its causes and consequences, and that is Ms. Dubravka Simonovic. Did I say that right?
Yeah,
okay. It was okay. It wasn't perfect, but it was okay. So she's been in that role for about 3 years already, and in that role she's mandated by the Human Rights Council to both receive and share information, but also respond effectively to the issue of violence against women, coordinate across the UN to ensure that there is a coordinated and sustained response, and also make recommendations to how to remedy such violations. She was previously head of the CDOC committee for several years after working as an ambassador in the Croatian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She has also been an active participant in the Council of Europe and holds several academic roles and writes extensively on these and other issues. And to my right is Cynthia Wong. She's a senior internet researcher at Human Rights Watch. She's been with the organization for about 6 years, but here in the Bay Area for the last 4 years. She oversees the organization's work on digital privacy, freedom of expression online, and business and human rights, with a focus on the ICT sector. And she's also a member of the Global Network Initiative and formerly director for the Center for Democracy and Technology's project on global internet freedom. She has a degree in law from NYU and studied engineering at U Texas Austin before that. So I'm going to open it up with the special rapporteur, who's going to give us sort of a sense of the field, nestled in a report that she's recently submitted, and then we'll turn it over to Cynthia. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you very much for Hunter Center for inviting me to present my work as UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, its causes and consequences, and my report on online violence against women. Let me start by a brief introduction of the mandate. As Jessica already pointed out, now I have 3 years in the mandate. I have 3 more years. My term was just extended during the session of Human Rights Council. But let me mention that this mandate on violence against women was established in '94 as one of the oldest special procedures. So we are independent mandates, what means that we are not UN employees. We are experts that are appointed by Human Rights Council. It was already mentioned that mandate is entrusted to produce recommendations to states at national, regional and global level. I can receive information from different stakeholders, including academic circles and NGOs, businesses and states, of course. I'm working closely with other special procedures and treaty bodies, in my case, CEDAW Committee and Working Group on Discriminatory Laws, which is another special procedure mechanism at the global level. I have some tools at my disposal, and basically I'm entrusted to visit countries and produce specific country reports related to violence against women. And I'm also invited to produce 2 thematic reports per year. I produce 1 report to Human Rights Council, and second report I produce to Third Committee of the General Assembly. I'm also invited to attend Commission on the Status of Women and Crime Commission in Vienna. So mandate is using really different tools in order to address contemporary challenges related to violence against women, its causes and consequences. Let me also mention that from beginning of my tenure, I have visited South Africa, Georgia, Israel, State of Palestine, Argentina, Australia, Bahamas, Canada, and my next visit is going to be Nepal. Whenever I'm visiting the country, I'm inviting different stakeholders to send me in advance all possible information about the situation in the country, and when I go to the country, I collect information from all possible sources. I do have meetings with government officials and trying to meet also members of the parliament, judiciary, to visit prisons, to visit shelters, to have inputs from non-governmental organizations, independent institutions, to also have inputs from academic institutions, so different sources in order to produce recommendations. With respect to thematic priorities and thematic report, today I'm going to launch my report on online violence against women, but I have already produced some other reports. I have just produced a new report on violence against women in politics, and this one was presented to General Assembly, and this one is very much interconnected with this report on online violence against women, because women in politics and public life are many times targeted by different types of online attacks in order to be silenced. With respect to other priorities of the mandate, I am focusing very much on prevention of gender-related killings of women, of femicides, and with respect to that area, I have followed up work of my predecessor. She published one report on gender-related killings of women, and after that report I was thinking that we need something more practical in order to see how to really focus on prevention of femicides. So I have invited all states to collect data on gender-related killings, to publish such data each year on International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women, and also to establish national mechanisms composed of different experts. That could be NGOs, that could be academicians, that could be intergovernmental bodies, that could look into cases, and in order to see what are major shortcomings that are coming out from number of cases. Because for example, if you have small country, 5 to 6 million, you have, let's say, 20 to 30 cases, so it's really possible to look into all cases and to see what are those patterns, what are those preventive measures that were missed, that were not done properly. In big countries like federal countries, it could be done on provincial level, it could be done on federal level, but at the end it will be important to see data that is coming out, that is comparable data for different parts of the world, and to see which type of laws and programs are working in terms of really preventing those preventable deaths. So at this International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women, I'm again calling states to send me information about already established mechanisms, data that they have collected, and good practices. And there are states that are doing a lot in this area. So you will see in my all country specific reports, specific focus on femicide data, collection of such data, and in general I am pushing for cooperation in this area with other global and regional independent mechanisms on violence against women. Then I have also published a report on integrated approach to shelters and protection orders from human rights perspective, and this is something that is available on a mandate's website. This one on violence against women in politics is also out, and now I will focus on online violence against women. So this is new area, and in this field I think that we really need to see how we will cooperate in the future in order to have independent mechanisms or different mechanisms at disposal at the UN level, regional mechanisms, states, and also all those intermediaries, big platforms working in digital field, how they will cooperate in order to apply human rights norms that we have developed up to now. So it is very important to see that this type of cooperation is very much needed, and currently we do not have such cooperation. So I hope that my visit to some companies here will start this process. It is not beginning of the process, because process has already started with some other special rapporteurs, and also when I have started this report, I have invited different experts to attend an expert group meeting, and some persons from Facebook already attended that meeting, so they already provided some inputs for this report. So how many of you had possibility to read this report that I'm presenting today? If not now, you can read it later. Thank you, it's nice to see one hand. And this is the basic problem. There are too many reports out, too many recommendations. So which one to follow? Is it report from Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women relevant? Is it report from special procedure related to freedom of expression? There is another one on right to privacy. There are also regional mechanisms that are also dealing with similar topics. There are also Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN Women, other UN agencies, and you will see someone is producing something also in this area, so there are different pieces out. And it is very important to see how in the future we can go in direction of pulling out something that is credible for all of us, that is providing connections between global and regional mechanisms and all those working in this area. So I have tried to use human rights norms and women's human rights framework as we have developed up to now, and basically I have tried to use at the global level CEDAW Convention, ratified by 189 states. Then Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, regional treaties, Belém do Pará, then Istanbul Convention, Maputo Protocol, all those instruments that are there and that are dealing with women's rights and violence against women. In addition to that, I have also tried to have inputs from those mechanisms that are already there, that are monitoring implementation of those treaties in order to have full picture related to challenges that they have. And it is extremely important to see that when we are addressing digital world and violence that is happening in digital world, to see that causes are very much based in real world. So here, if we look around us, we will see that we are living in a world of gender inequalities. We have not yet reached a point where we can say there is no gender-based discrimination against women, there is no violence. Regular situation is that we do have differences between countries. We do have some good laws in some countries. We have now some strong regional treaties like New European Convention on Prevention of Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, the Istanbul Convention, the new one, with 82 articles that are providing very good roadmap there. But still, we are seeing that there are so many embedded forms of discrimination against women and violence against women that is ongoing in real world, in realities. So we could not expect that now this digital world is going to be without this type of discrimination and violence against women. But the main challenge is now to see what are the new forms that those new digital platforms are enabling. And we are seeing that some old forms are having some new features. You can transmit some things much faster to global world, so there are higher level of risks there. There are, for example, this non-consensual distribution of intimate images with so-called name of revenge porn. There are new things that are happening on all those platforms. And the main question is, so who is responsible now for prevention, for protection of victims, for prosecution of perpetrators? What is with responsibility of states? What is responsibility of those intermediaries or platforms that are hosting those different applications through which this violence is going in that direction? And what is then with mechanisms to address those challenges? What is with services available to women? Could we apply regular services like protection orders? Could we entrust legal system to act in such situation? And how to proceed in direction of real prevention? I have also tried to address not only content but also access to new technologies, because in some parts of the world there is no perception of a problem of access, but in some other developing parts of the world and rural areas there is problem with access. So I think that in the future we would need more information about these gender disparities related to access to new technologies, and then we have to see how to remedy those disparities. It would be also interesting to know if those big companies like Facebook, Twitter and so on, what is their employment policy? Are they looking at gender balance? Do they have any kind of measures for employment of women and so on? I don't know the structure, what is there, but in the future it will be important also to follow up. Then intersectional discrimination is something that is very important ongoing discrimination in real world that is even exaggerated at those platforms, because with all those possibilities opened up by internet and new technologies, women from minorities, indigenous group, LGBTI community, they are targeted. Human rights women, human rights defenders, they are receiving specific attacks because they are active, they are political, they are active in specific fields, so they are even receiving death threats, and they have to have specific protection. I have, for example, I'm a lawyer dealing with human rights for past 25 years, but I didn't know anything about anonymity and encryption. But now I have learned during this process that anonymity and encryption is extremely important tool when we are speaking about new digital technologies for protection of those that are not able to freely express their views in, let's say, undemocratic states. So we have to see how to really encourage those platforms to proceed in direction of protecting them in a proper manner. With respect to conclusions, we do have huge challenges here because at the UN level it was recognized by UN system and other special procedures that human rights protected offline should be protected online. But this is easy to say. And I have repeated this with respect to women's rights protected offline should be protected online. It is also easier to say than to follow up on this. But then we have to see what is happening now and what are those key issues that should be addressed at the national level and also at the level of intermediaries and level of states. So I do have set of recommendations for different stakeholders here. For example, for intermediaries, it would be very important for them if they could see the value of upholding a principle of application of UN human rights framework to all states as global norms that are the only global values applicable today to all persons around the world. We do have differences. So I should conclude my statement?
No. I wonder if the battery
It could be battery.
Can you all hear still if she's talking?
Okay, I can try to be a little bit louder. So it would be very important for them to see that that could give them advantage even with respect to states, because states have main obligation to protect human rights of all persons under their jurisdiction. But states are not doing this as they should. So many times states are not really incorporating and implementing human rights treaties which they have ratified. They have not applied women's human rights norms properly. They are not really providing for, let's say, protection orders, shelters, things that are needed and so on. So they are also not applying those frameworks that are there. And if we somehow go in direction of sending message to intermediaries that they can apply those norms by themselves, and with that respect they will be in a better position as intermediaries because they are using global norms. They are not using only some local norms that are maybe too restrictive. So that could, in my view, that could be a good way forward. But in order to achieve this, it would be also important to send message to states that on the other hand, states have responsibility to uphold and to apply all those norms that they have accepted and ratified with respect to persons in their jurisdiction, but also they have responsibility with respect to private persons and enterprises. And here CEDAW Convention is very explicit. CEDAW Convention is saying that discrimination should be prohibited, done by private persons, enterprises also. So the enterprises are directly mentioned, and this is this due diligence principle that is basically giving this obligation to states to provide different laws, protective measures, punishment of perpetrators, services to victims, and so on. So states should develop cooperation with intermediaries, and in that cooperation it will be important to have inclusion of non-governmental organizations that are in many cases already providing direct support to victims of online violence. We have seen many very able non-governmental organizations that are doing a great job in this respect. Then it will be important to have protective measures, to have legislative measures at the national level with respect to new forms of violence against women, like online harassment, so-called revenge porn, online stalking, and the new ways of abuses that we are seeing on those platforms. It will be also important to encourage cooperation with independent mechanisms like my mandate and treaty bodies. And here in this area, I think that could be the added value of the UN system. In general, cooperation with the UN system, and I hope that in the future, Office of the High Commissioner will have office here in order to connect better with academic community, but also with tech companies. But it would be important to have all those mechanisms that are already entrusted to provide their recommendations in this circle of those that should be involved in the whole process. Because now we are at a challenging point. These new technologies and internet could be misused, and those different forms of violence and discrimination could be even widened through use of internet. And in some parts of the world in which there are no proper laws, not human rights principles and so on, the situation could be even more dangerous than in developed countries. So I think that there is a possibility for all of us to look into those recommendations and how we can, from different angles, work together in order to look into cooperation, implementation, and general idea that human rights norms are giving good direction for prevention of different forms of violence against women that are forms of gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. I really appreciate your point, specifically on encouraging states to collect data on this. One, because I think it forces them to pay attention to the issue, but two, I imagine we'll hear in the Q&A a little bit about how someone in your position might be able to use that data for advocacy purposes. So heading over to Cynthia.
Great. So first of all, thanks to the Honda Center for having us, and thanks very much to the Rapporteur and to the High Commissioner's Office for bringing this discussion into the heart of Silicon Valley. As Jesse mentioned, I'm Cynthia. I'm the Internet Researcher at Human Rights Watch, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about freedom of expression, privacy, and the human rights responsibilities of the tech companies in the digital age. I actually want to start with a quick survey. Who in this room uses some form of social media every day, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, WhatsApp? Nearly everyone, not surprising. How many of you have ever experienced any kind of harassment or abuse on those platforms, or have witnessed or know someone who has? Again, not surprising. I think we're kind of, as researchers, we're still at the very beginning of systematically documenting this problem, but I think the available data really shows what a lot of us kind of know implicitly based on our own experience, which is that especially for women, for people of color, for LGBT communities, harassment and abuse can be quite pervasive on some of these platforms. One Pew Internet study from 2014 that surveyed people here in the US found that a full quarter of the young women who responded had experienced online stalking and sexual harassment. And a follow-up study in 2017 found that over half of young women who responded had received unwanted explicit images while online. Amnesty International actually did a really great survey last year that looked at 8 countries, and they found that of the people who reported experiencing some sort of violence online, as a result they experienced increased levels of stress, anxiety, panic attacks, and even lower self-esteem and lower self-confidence. So that's all to say that the work of the Rapporteur is extremely, I think, timely and really important, and we've kind of reached this critical stage where the companies, I think, realize this is a problem, but they're really struggling to figure out, well, how do we fix this when, in fact, violence against women has been happening since the beginning of time, both offline and now online. So I actually wanted to pull out some of the themes from the report that really resonated with me personally, and what some of the research that we do and my colleagues in the Women's Rights Division at Human Rights Watch do as well. And the first theme really is that online and offline harms are really intrinsically linked, right? And I think in a lot of cases you can't really separate them. Things like harassment, stalking, revenge porn, sextortation, which is kind of blackmail, right? Not only cause direct psychological harm, but they often cause women and girls to withdraw from online spaces completely. And this really inhibits women and girls' full participation in social and political life, as we all know, much of which now takes place online. And it also has direct impacts on freedom of expression and privacy, right? You self-censor, your digital information might be leaked online, and that has a direct impact on you. This in turn also causes economic harms, which is something that the report highlights, right? In one particularly documented campaign, a couple of Yale law students were actually targeted by trolls and harassers for multiple years, starting from when they applied to law school all the way even to now. And part of that campaign was to basically game their Google search results based on their name so that fake information and rumors would be surfaced when a potential employer or academic institution Googled them. And the real purpose here was to basically prevent them from seeking employment and getting jobs, and that has a direct impact. There's another survey of about 110 female bloggers, and 80 of them reported that they had been harassed because of their blogging activity, ranging from sexually charged comments to doxing to rape and death threats, stalking, and even identity theft, right? And as many of us know, blogging is actually a really important way for academics, for advocates like myself, for even corporate leaders to really build their public profile, right? It's really a part of being a public speaker. And so if you are targeted for your blogging, that has a direct impact on your career and your economic viability. I think even more serious is that sometimes, very quickly, online abuse and harassment can very quickly move to very serious offline consequences, right? So if someone is doxing your private information, sharing your address, encouraging people to show up at your door, that can encourage offline harassment and even violence, and in extreme cases has led to people being murdered or committing suicide because of cyberbullying. And finally, the other thing I would kind of call out is that technology has also played a role in worsening intimate partner violence and domestic violence as well. So there's been several stories in the last year that maybe you've seen about the rise of so-called stalkerware. So these are basically apps, surveillance apps that abusers will often put on people's phones so they can better track and control their partner's behavior and basically track every single place they've gone to and every person that they've talked to as a really way to maintain control. And if you look at some of the marketing materials for these apps, it's really disturbing. They are marketed explicitly for this purpose. And it's really disturbing, and it's an area that is underregulated and really troubling. The second point I wanted to pull out, which is really about the responsibility of states, or rather sometimes the failure of states to act based on these new trends. The issue of violence against women in general is already an area of failure for many states, as the rapporteur has pointed out. And then when you layer on all these new technological trends, the new ways in which abusers are adopting technology to amplify the negative effect of what they're trying to do, it adds even more risks for women and even more barriers to getting help, right? So in a lot of cases, police and judges may not understand the full impact of the offline, how the offline and online harms are linked, or may dismiss complaints of online harassment as, not actually that serious, right? They're just making jokes, it's not a big deal, why don't you just ignore them, right? But even where victims or survivors find a sympathetic ear in law enforcement, there's a lot of barriers still in place. So as the rapporteur mentioned, many laws have not actually caught up to where the abuse is now happening. So in a lot of cases, even here in the US, and state laws don't actually cover online stalking. There's no actual way to criminalize that because the law just hasn't caught up there yet. In other cases, the police might not have the tools to do digital investigations. They don't know how to collect the evidence to actually make their case, or the perpetrator is halfway across the world and so far out of their reach, right? And so I think this is one of the biggest challenges to addressing the problem, even when in countries where you have states that are dedicated to addressing the problem of violence against women online. Our legal and democratic institutions really haven't caught up to the pace of technological change in terms of their ability to protect the rights of women in the digital sphere. And so that kind of brings me to the final thing, which is, this is why it's so important that the rapporteur is focused, I think, on the tech sector, because they are actors that I think are idealistic in a lot of ways, right? And they want to address this issue, and they have a really big role to play. These are global platforms, and so whatever they do can actually have an immense impact for the rights of women and girls around the world. But for social media companies, I'm going to focus mostly on them, and I'm kind of curious to hear about other companies you're interested in. But it really means understanding how women, women of color, LGBT individuals actually experience their platforms in practice, right? So these companies all do user research because they want users to use their service, they want their advertising dollars, right? But are they really doing that research from the perspective of women and other marginalized groups to really understand that they might experience the platform differently than other users? And so I think it really starts from that perspective. I think for a long time the response from companies was the same from many governments, which was, don't feed the trolls, right? Like, if you ignore the provocateurs who all they want is attention, then they'll just go away. But I think as we found with many of these harms, that's just not going to be good enough, right? I think it's important to provide tools to women to block users that might be abusing them or to block unwanted content, but if someone's releasing your private information, that harm's not going to go away just because you can't see it, right? And so there need to be other solutions here. So I think from our perspective, what we said is companies need to really understand how women experience these platforms and start by ensuring that their policies against hate speech or harassment or the rules for what you can or can't do on this platform takes gender into account and the experiences of women, and recognizes new forms of violence against women that are now becoming more prevalent. So as a concrete example, it was only just 3 years ago that Google finally created a policy against revenge porn, the non-consensual sharing of explicit images. Prior to that, they actually had no prohibition against that, and we thought that was a really great step for them to take. Second, once companies have policies that take into account the experiences of women, to build better tools to enforce these policies, right? So if you're being harassed, you can flag someone or report them as being an abuser, but a lot of these tools are just not that accessible and they're still very much a black box, right? I think users sometimes flag things they think is harassing or hate speech or whatever it is. They get no response from the companies. They have no idea why it wasn't taken down or whatever the reason is, right? And so I think companies have a lot of work to do to build better tools, to make them more accessible and to make them more transparent to the average user out there. Third, I think these tools need to be accompanied by more resources to actually review things that are flagged as harassment or whatever it is, as violence against women. It does no good to have tools to report if there aren't enough people on staff in these companies to actually do something about those reports. And the final recommendation we've made, and I think this is one of the hardest ones for the companies to really swallow because it kind of goes directly to their very business model, right? Which is they need to examine how their algorithms that undergird how their services run, whether they themselves are exacerbating the problem of violence against women online. When algorithms are designed to maximize user engagement, so clicks and likes and eyeballs that drive advertising dollars, then that might inadvertently favor content that is the most extreme or the most incendiary, right? Because that's what really people want to read and click on. And I think part of the problem is that kind of content can be the kind of content that makes these platforms hostile to women and to other marginalized groups. And that's the kind of content that might actually be silencing women and driving them off the platforms. So I think I'm going to stop there. I would love to hear people's questions, to hear about your experiences on social media, and where you think kind of companies could do better.
Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks for giving us some very concrete examples as well as recommendations that you've made and some positive engagement that you've had in the tech community, because sometimes it seems like it's hard to find promising practices in this space, so that's encouraging. I think your point about algorithms also had me thinking about who is sort of involved in designing and training these algorithms and what perspectives are missing from that process as well. I wanted to just, use my moderator's privilege to ask one question, and then I'll open it up. So it's sort of multidimensional, so let me try to digest it. But I'm thinking about sort of how we stay ahead of the negative consequences of technology, right? Because there's obviously a lot of, and you touched on this, there's a lot of room for empowerment with technology, particularly of women who might be in places where they're more marginalized. Technology can give them a voice, it can give them access to a world that they might not access otherwise. And obviously this is a challenge we face in a lot of spaces, not just related to violence against women. So I'm wondering if you have any lessons learned about sort of how we stay ahead of that, and coupled with that is around sort of just how to empower folks around understanding their digital identity. This is something I was actually really surprised in the aftermath of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, how many of my friends and people that I'm okay, these are people with high access to tech and high awareness of implications were shocked that this had happened. And I was just this doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's obviously I'm not happy about it and it's unfortunate, but there's terms and conditions that we often don't read or that we sort of sign up for, and we hope that companies might be looking out for our good, but really they don't necessarily have any fiduciary duty to us, and in fact they have duties to their shareholders. So sort of linked with that question of the keeping up with the empowerment potential of technology, how do we in turn try to build awareness and educate around digital identity, knowing that our personal information is probably the most valuable resource that any of us have? I'll just go on.
Thank you for this question, and this is a very important question. I have tried to address this question in those recommendations that you can read later on. And it is based on understanding that really there is a huge potential with respect to those new technologies related to fast education that is available to all around the world through internet and those different platforms there. And that education should target young boys and girls that are using already those technologies, but those technologies are not really uploaded with this human rights education, with this empowerment knowledge that should be there. And now if we also look at Sdg Agenda, this is Sustainable Development Goals, it is very important to recognize that now for the first time we do have recognition of achieving gender equality and empowerment of women as sustainable goal number 5 that should be promoted by all, including all those digital platforms. And it should be done from very early stage, because if we don't start very early, we are going to miss the point. With respect to digital identity, it's like DNA, it's always there, but you have to see how to protect it, you have to see what the implications, you have to see how to protect privacy, how to protect freedom of expression, but also how to protect life to free of violence, gender-based violence against women. And with respect to gender-based violence, we are at the point where we are seeing some progress, but this progress is extremely slow. If we look, for example, at political participation of women and efforts to increase political participation of women, you will see that the current percentage average in parliaments all over the world is 23% of women. So it's very slow progress. It is progress. There are more women at political level. There are some presidents and prime ministers, but 7% or something like that. So it would be important to see what are those obstacles for women to advance faster. And there are many obstacles also related to different forms of violence against women and discrimination against women in this political area. There is also domestic violence that is ongoing, that is still taboo, that is still kind of happening behind the closed doors, that we need to open up and to send a clear message that there are state responsibility also for prevention of domestic violence. So there are many questions related to now this use of new technologies with respect to empowerment of women, and I hope that this is something that is going to be recognized by all those that are using those technologies, but also intermediaries, because without this recognition we are not going to progress. Thank you.
On the point about political participation, hopefully having a former female president in the new role as High Commissioner will be helpful. Cynthia?
Yeah, I guess I would say, there were a couple of questions in there.
Yeah.
I guess I would say, the social media companies, they're not monolithic, right? They have their business interests, but if you think about the engineers who spend, 10, 12 hours a day building their tools, they have an interest in making sure that what they spend their careers on are actually doing good in the world and not harming people. And so I think with that, there's a lot of possibility there, right? So I think with the Me Too movement and greater ability and bigger microphones for women to kind of tell their story and their own experience of how they experience harassment online, how they experience violence online and offline. I think it's really important to start documenting those and really bringing them to the companies so that they can't ignore the problem, and then working with the companies in some cases, right, to say, here's what we're actually experiencing, help us figure out how to make your platforms better so it's a better experience for women and girls and other marginalized groups.